Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, imagine for a second that there are two lines to get a government job. There's the official one, the one you stand in for years, right? And then there's this hidden back door that some people just get to use. Today, we're diving into the landmark court case that tried to lock that back door for good.
So let's just ask the question straight up. Is there a backdoor to a government job? This question, it really gets to the heart of a massive, long-standing issue in Indian public employment. And for decades, the answer was, kind of troublingly, yes, there was a backdoor, and it was creating a huge, huge systemic problem.
So to really get why the court's decision was so huge, so monumental, we first have to unpack the problem it was trying to solve, and that is this whole concept of backdoor entry.
Okay, so picture this. All across the country, for years and years, government departments and public companies were just hiring people on a temporary basis. No formal exams, no big interviews. They were pretty much just bypassing that long line out front and letting folks in through a side entrance.
And what that did was create these two totally separate parallel systems. On one hand, you have the front door, the constitutional ideal, open competition, where everybody gets a fair shot, all based on merit. But then you had the back door, this irregular, often kind of arbitrary system of appointments that created a whole separate and really unequal track.
And this wasn't just a one-off thing. It created this vicious cycle. See, someone gets an irregular appointment, they work for years, and then, and you can't really blame them, they go to court demanding that their temporary job be made permanent, regularized. Courts all over the country were just flooded with these cases.
Well, eventually, the Supreme Court basically said, okay, enough is enough. It's time to confront this thing head on. And that brings us to this landmark ruling in 2006.
The case that would change everything was Secretary, State of Karnataka versus Umadevi. This became the moment. The highest court in the land stepped in to draw a really firm line in the sand and hopefully bring some clarity to all the chaos. Now, here's the really brilliant part of the court's whole argument. They didn't just treat this as some simple employment dispute. No, they elevated it. They made it a fundamental constitutional issue, centering the entire case on the principle of equality.
So, the whole judgment was built on this one foundation, Articles 14 and 16 of the Constitution, the part that guarantees every single citizen an equal shot at competing for public jobs. The court was basically asking, look, how can there possibly be equality if some people can just walk in through a back door?
So, the court established the principle, right? But what was the direct consequence? Well, it was like a judicial stop sign.
The verdict was just crystal clear. The court declared that making these irregular backdoor appointments permanent was illegal. It was unconstitutional. It was like putting up a massive judicial stop sign to a practice that had been going on for decades.
And the court's logic was so simple, so clear. Every single time one person gets regularized through the back door, you are directly denying countless other eligible citizens, people who are waiting patiently to apply through the proper channels, their constitutional right to even be considered for that job.
But the court also had to deal with the human side of this. What about the people who had already been working in these roles for years, often for really low wages? So the court created a very, very narrow one-time exception.
And when I say the conditions were strict, they were incredibly strict. To even qualify, you had to have worked for over 10 years in a properly sanctioned post. And, crucially, your initial appointment had to be irregular, meaning, yeah, it didn't follow the right procedure, but not illegal, which means you weren't fundamentally unqualified for the job to begin with. It's a really fine line. This 10-year requirement, that was the big one. It was the most critical filter. It really underlined that this was not some remedy for short-term or recent hires. No, this was a pragmatic, one-time solution for people who had given a decade or more of their lives to a job, caught in a system that was deeply flawed.
So, what's the legacy of this judgment? What did it all lead to? Well, it fundamentally rewrote the rules of the game for all public hiring in India. The whole legacy of the Umadevi case can really be boiled down to this simple but super powerful guide for all government bodies. The message was just unmistakable. The front door is the only door. Open, competitive, merit-based selection. That's the only way forward.
So, the ultimate takeaway here is that this judgment didn't just settle a few cases. It went way beyond that. It restored and it reinforced the constitutional vision for public employment. It made fairness, equality, and merit the undisputed cornerstones of the whole system.
And that kind of leaves us with this one last big, thought-provoking question
The ruling, no doubt about it, established this crucial principle of fairness for everybody. But in doing that, it also created real hardship for a lot of individuals who were already caught up in the old irregular system. It kind of forces us to ask, what is the true cost of correcting a systemic wrong?